The inner circle is in full-blown crisis mode after a whistleblower just handed over the keys to the kingdom. We have obtained leaked Florida real estate filings that reveal a desperate scramble to hide assets before the legal hammer falls. You won't believe the late-night panic currently unfolding behind closed doors. It began with a phone call nobody inside Trump's Florida operation was supposed to receive. Not from a reporter. Not from a prosecutor. Not from a political rival. But from someone on the inside. A whistleblower. And according to multiple sources now familiar with the expanding fallout, that whistleblower didn't arrive empty-handed. They arrived carrying what one senior legal analyst described as the financial equivalent of a live grenade: confidential Florida real estate filings, internal ownership transfers, emergency trust restructurings, and a paper trail investigators are now racing to authenticate before it disappears forever. Tonight, we are going to walk through what may become one of the most explosive financial exposure crises ever to hit a former president's inner circle. Because behind the polished resort walls, behind the televised confidence, behind the public denials and carefully rehearsed talking points, something extraordinary is reportedly happening in private. Panic. Real panic. Not political panic. Not media panic. Asset panic. And before we begin, I want you to hold one question in your mind for the rest of this report, because by the end of tonight's story, it may completely change how you understand the phrase, real estate empire. If people truly believe they've done nothing wrong, why are assets suddenly moving in the middle of the night? Write your answer in the comments now, because according to individuals familiar with the unfolding situation in Florida, that exact question is now consuming attorneys, advisors, accountants, and members of Trump's own inner circle behind closed doors. The first signs appeared quietly. Too quietly. A cluster of amended Florida property filings submitted within unusually compressed time windows. Ownership adjustments appearing across interconnected limited liability structures. Trust modifications executed with extraordinary speed. Parcels reassigned. Signature authorities altered. Beneficiary pathways revised. Individually, the filings looked technical. Collectively, they looked like evacuation routes. One forensic accounting expert reviewing portions of the leaked documents reportedly said, "This doesn't resemble estate planning. It resembles defensive positioning." That sentence changed everything. Because investigators are now examining whether high-value Florida properties connected to Trump's wider business orbit were being reorganized in anticipation of potential legal exposure, financial judgments, or asset vulnerability stemming from multiple ongoing investigations surrounding the former president and his associates. And then came the leak that triggered total chaos. According to sources familiar with the disclosure, the whistleblower allegedly provided investigators and journalists with internal correspondence tied directly to emergency discussions inside Trump-aligned legal and financial networks, emails, draft agreements, property maps, late-night conference schedules, internal risk assessments. But it was one phrase buried inside an allegedly leaked memorandum that sent shockwaves through legal circles across Florida. Accelerate transfers before attachment risk escalates. Read that again. Before attachment risk escalates. In legal language, attachment risk refers to the possibility that courts or authorities could freeze, seize, or place claims against assets during litigation or enforcement proceedings. That phrase transformed the story overnight. Because suddenly this was no longer just about property paperwork. It became about intent. And intent is where financial investigations become dangerous. The documents reportedly center around several interconnected Florida real estate entities tied to luxury holdings, hospitality operations, shell corporations, and layered ownership structures that investigators are now trying to untangle in real time. One former federal prosecutor described the structure this way. Imagine a hall of mirrors built by tax attorneys. Ownership inside ownership. Trusts inside holding companies. LLCs connected through secondary management entities operating across multiple jurisdictions. The complexity itself may become part of the investigation. Because according to analysts reviewing portions of the filings, some transfers appear to have occurred with unusual urgency, including transactions allegedly executed outside normal business scheduling patterns. One filing timestamp reportedly stunned investigators. 2:41 a.m. Not noon. Not during market hours. Not after scheduled board review. But nearly 3 in the morning. That detail has now become central to the growing suspicion that something inside Trump's financial network shifted abruptly after insiders became aware of escalating legal exposure. And here is where the story becomes even more extraordinary. The whistleblower reportedly didn't just leak documents. They leaked internal reactions. According to individuals familiar with communications now circulating among investigators, members of Trump's extended legal orbit allegedly began scrambling within hours of realizing the breach had occurred. Emergency calls. Weekend strategy meetings. Document retention warnings. Internal loyalty concerns. Digital access reviews. One source close to the situation described the atmosphere inside portions of the Florida operation as controlled terror. That phrase keeps resurfacing. Controlled terror. Because according to multiple individuals familiar with the unfolding crisis, the fear is no longer simply about public embarrassment. It is about whether prosecutors or civil investigators could interpret the filings as evidence of intentional asset shielding. And if that happens, the legal consequences escalate dramatically. To understand why, you need to understand one critical concept. Timing. In financial investigations, timing can be more important than the transaction itself. Moving assets years before litigation? Often normal. Moving them after legal threats intensify? Investigators start asking questions. Moving them rapidly, secretly, and through interconnected structures immediately before potential enforcement actions. That is where lawyers stop sleeping. The deeper analysts dug into the leaked Florida records, the stranger the patterns became. Properties changing managerial control without obvious operational reasons. Ownership pathways rerouted through secondary entities. Corporate officers disappearing from filings. Replacement signatures appearing suddenly across multiple documents within compressed periods. And then came the detail reportedly causing the greatest alarm among investigators. Several filing sequences may have been backdated. Now listen carefully because this part matters enormously. Investigators have not publicly concluded that fraudulent documentation occurred. No formal criminal finding has yet been announced regarding falsified records. But forensic document analysts are reportedly examining metadata inconsistencies tied to execution timestamps, filing preparation logs, and document generation sequences. In plain English, some investigators reportedly suspect portions of the paperwork may not have been created when the paperwork claims it was created. If proven, that changes everything. Because the investigation would no longer center merely on asset movement. It could become a records integrity case. And records integrity cases have a way of expanding very quickly. The political fallout inside Trump's orbit was immediate. Publicly, allies dismissed the leaks as deep state fiction and manufactured narratives. Privately, according to multiple sources familiar with internal discussions, advisors allegedly began evaluating worst-case legal exposure scenarios tied to Florida property holdings and associated business entities. One attorney reportedly asked during an emergency strategy session, "How much did the whistleblower actually copy?" Nobody in the room knew. That uncertainty is now poisoning everything. Because in modern investigations, the first leak is rarely the only leak. And insiders are reportedly terrified that additional financial records, communication chains, or internal directives could emerge in waves over the coming weeks. The fear inside Trump's financial network is not simply exposure. It is sequencing. What comes out next? Who it implicates next? What timeline investigators reconstruct next? That is the nightmare. Then investigators reportedly uncovered the detail now causing panic among compliance experts. Some of the entities involved may share overlapping operational personnel connected to previously scrutinized financial structures already examined in unrelated investigations. That overlap matters enormously, because overlapping personnel can create connective tissue between cases prosecutors previously treated separately. One former financial crimes investigator reportedly summarized the danger in a single sentence. Independent fires become an inferno once investigators realize the buildings are connected underground. And according to individuals familiar with portions of the inquiry, authorities are now examining whether the leaked documents reveal coordinated financial behavior rather than isolated administrative actions. That distinction could determine whether this remains a civil exposure issue or evolves into something far more serious. The most chilling moment reportedly came during a private legal review held late Sunday night. According to one source familiar with the meeting, attorneys projected portions of the leaked filings onto a conference room screen while cross-referencing known investigation timelines tied to ongoing litigation and financial exposure risks. The room reportedly went silent when they reached the transfer sequence involving one specific Florida luxury holding. Why? Because the timing allegedly aligned almost perfectly with a confidential legal development not yet public at the time of the filing. One person in the room reportedly said quietly, "They knew." Nobody answered. That silence is now hanging over the entire investigation. Because if investigators determine insiders acted with prior knowledge of escalating legal threats while restructuring vulnerable assets, prosecutors may begin examining whether portions of the activity crossed from financial management into deliberate obstruction territory. And obstruction changes everything. The whistleblower at the center of the storm remains unidentified. That fact alone is fueling paranoia inside Trump's wider network. Because whoever leaked the documents reportedly possessed deep operational familiarity with internal filing systems, entity structures, and legal coordination pathways. This was not random theft. This appears targeted. Surgical. One compliance consultant reviewing the situation described it this way. The whistleblower knew exactly which wires to cut. And perhaps most terrifying for those involved, investigators reportedly believe additional material may still exist outside government possession. More filings. More correspondence. More transfer records. Possibly recordings. Nobody inside the operation reportedly knows the full scope of what was taken. That uncertainty has triggered what one source described as a loyalty earthquake across portions of Trump's inner financial and legal circle. People are reviewing old conversations, checking access histories, questioning longtime associates, looking sideways at colleagues they trusted for years. Because once a whistleblower penetrates the inner circle, paranoia becomes operational reality. And then came the development now sending shockwaves through political and legal circles nationwide. Federal investigators are reportedly evaluating whether portions of the leaked Florida records justify expanding existing financial inquiries already surrounding Trump-linked business structures. Not launching entirely new investigations. Expanding existing ones. That distinction matters enormously because expansion allows investigators to connect evidence streams that previously existed in separate legal silos. Real estate. Tax exposure. Asset disclosures. Corporate structuring. Financial transfers. Suddenly, the walls separating those categories begin disappearing. Publicly, Trump allies continue projecting confidence. Privately, according to multiple individuals familiar with recent strategy discussions, the mood is far darker. Because beneath the public bravado sits a terrifying realization. Paper trails do not care about politics. Documents do not panic. Metadata does not negotiate. Timestamps do not go on television. And if investigators successfully reconstruct the chronology behind the leaked Florida filings, the story may stop being about optics entirely. It may become about intent, coordination, and concealment. Tonight, one fact already appears unavoidable. Someone inside Trump's world believed the public was never supposed to see these records. Someone believed these transfers would remain buried beneath layers of entities and paperwork and legal complexity. Someone believed the walls would hold. But now the documents are out. Investigators are moving. Lawyers are scrambling. And behind the gold-plated confidence projected on camera, panic is reportedly spreading through the very people who once believed they controlled the entire board. The whistleblower opened the vault. The filings are now in motion. And somewhere inside Florida's maze of luxury properties, shell companies, midnight transfers, and confidential legal strategy sessions, investigators are still searching for the answer to the question now haunting Trump's inner circle. What else did the whistleblower take? Subscribe and turn on notifications because this story is developing rapidly, and the next document leak could change everything.